What we want to do for this part is not workshop necessarily things, but answer questions that you have, because I'm sure you have some from the previous hour. So if there's one already. We have people with microphones. Go ahead.
We were just discussing over here, how to harness the power of AI at our firms. And one question or one thing we were discussing that I wanted to ask you about is how, if it's possible, you can take like PDFs and search content within PDFs. For example, can I take, in Nancy's example, 30 contracts from across, that we signed with clients and say, where do we find risk in these? What are commonalities that we would see as risk? And where are we seeing it in these contracts? How do you do that? Can you do it?
It is something that can be done. In fact, let's bring up a website here. So if you want to, so there's actually services that are highly specialized are starting to do this. This one is, oops, I need to mirror my screen here. Displays, and we want to arrange, nope. You would think I would know how to do this on my own machine. Ironic. All right, let's just bounce it. So this is one called NDA Lin. You upload your NDA to it, and it compares it to a database of a gazillion other NDAs and tells you whether or not you should sign it and what's wrong with it or not. So it is something that can be done. The companies that specialize in this typically have a fairly large corpus of very similarly types of documents. IBM has one called Watson GRC, which stands for Government Regulatory and Compliance. That one is one that where you take your documents, like your employee handbook, and then you take the applicable laws and tells you whether your handbook is in violation or not. Those are things that you would work directly with a company like IBM with. And they will be reassuringly expensive.
You explained early on in the previous session the difference between supervised and unsupervised.
Yes.
Can you touch on that again? Because I'm not 100% clear in what the difference was in your example.
Sure. So supervised learning says, here's a bunch of data and an outcome, look for this outcome. So the simplest example would be like the cancer example. Like here's a bunch of data, find the thing that looks like this, right? Unsupervised is, here's a pile of data, what's in the box, right? So you're handed 100,000 tweets. Categorize them. Are they all about, Elon Musk? Yes, right now.
One is, I'm looking for something specific.
It's supervised. Yes.
The other is, I don't really know what I'm looking for. What is it?
Right, exactly. Exactly, yes. Next question.
Hi, so I have a question on the generative AI. I'm the Eden Hunt blog person.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, if you're using, how smart is it today from the standpoint of not having blogs that are put out that just sound like everyone else? I know you said it was a rough draft that it was spit out.
Yep.
How much should we tailor that after?
It depends on how good it is, right? So there's two considerations. One of the considerations is, this is something that I had a discussion with, who did an entire show on YouTube about this. Content that is created purely by machine cannot be copyrighted because machines may not hold copyright, right? There was a case of a monkey that took a selfie with a photographer's camera. It was fairly famous, a fairly famous case. And the photographer tried to copyright it, and the Supreme Court ruled the content was created by someone who is not a human. Only humans, according to US copyright law, only humans may hold copyright. Therefore, anything that's created by a non-human is in the public domain, right? It cannot be copyrighted. So a machine can create a first draft, then you edit it and clean it up and make it yours, and then what you've done is yours. Right? So that's a major consideration. If you just copy and paste straight out of the machine, there is no copyright on it, which also means that a competitor can use it freely as well. And then the second part is, yeah, it's a rough draft. It's not going to be perfectly polished the first time out. But what it does, what I find it very helpful for is when you're staring at that blank page. You're like, what do I write? Right, so you take something like OpenAI, and you say, let's see if we can do this here without spilling water over my laptop. Where are we? Let's go to full screen. And so I'm staring at this screen. I'm like, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to do here. It's just a big blank page. Let's write a 4-paragraph job description for a civil engineer project manager to work at Mead and Hunt. Right? Pretty straightforward. And let's hit go. So this is a start, right? This is the start. You do not just copy and paste this, because there's definitely things wrong with it. And to what Kat was saying earlier, this is not unique. This is drawn from thousands of examples of job descriptions, and if we, as we did in Kat's session, if we generally get the job descriptions suck, and the machine's been trained on things that suck, you're just going to create more suck. Yes.
So it's pulling copyrighted information into creating a new draft.
Yes.
And every one of us in this room has read a competitor's proposal and seen something that we wrote in our proposal that somebody else borrowed. So
Yes.
does copyrighted material, when it's on the internet, become not copyrighted?
So this is a very good question that has not been settled in a court of law yet. The challenge is that it's not going out and searching the internet. What the companies do to create these models is scrape enormous amounts of text from the internet, copyrighted and not copyrighted alike. And it all gets put essentially in a really, really big blender. That's not the technical term, but it's close enough. And then you just basically take a spoonful out, and it's a mash. No one company is going to say that was from us, right? Because it is a massive mash. But every company can say some portion of this model is derived from content that you scraped from us. And so it has to be worked out in a court of law whether or not a machine learning model is a derivative work from a copyright perspective. And if it is, then these companies that have created these things will have to go back and retrain their models on only certified public domain content, excluding copyrighted stuff. Now, where it gets useful for companies like ours is you can take one of these models, and even one of the future models, if they make a certified organic, grass-fed model, and you can take your specific documents from your company. You can do what's called fine-tuning, which is to say, I want to put these documents also into this model, put them into the blender, but I want you to give undue weight to our stuff, so we want what it spits out to look and sound more like us than anything else in here. And so that process of fine-tuning would then create stuff that's much more like you than anything else.
So we don't need any of us anymore. We need people who supervise machines to make sure that it's realistic.
So you laugh, but that's the truth. What AI does is instead of saying, first violin, second violist, timpani, what we will become is we'll become conductors of the orchestra, and the orchestra is the machines, right? The challenge is, from a hiring perspective, is orchestras don't need 50 conductors. Orchestras need one conductor. So who among the 50 people that the orchestra employed is going to be good enough to be the one conductor of the orchestra? One of the things, and we'll barely touch on the politics of this, but one of the things that we have to have a very serious conversation about planet-wide in the next 5 to 10 years is something like universal basic income. Because you will have a lot of jobs that will be diminished or roles collapsed because you're conducting the machines, right? And yes, there'll be brand new jobs created, like prompt engineering, which is essentially how do I write the input to get the best result out of the output, is going to be a short-term profession, right? It will not be for the long term because the models are evolving to get better at that. But somebody like that person I used to work with at that PR firm who was just copying and pasting from Google all day, that position is going away, right? Any position that is purely repetitive is going away. I have one of those like silly robot vacuums right? The little thing that bumps into walls and stuff, it cleans my basement every day. But when you think about that, if you have a fleet of those in like a school, you don't need 5 janitors anymore. You can have 1 janitor just empties the machines, And so every profession that has repeatable tasks is in danger of having some of those tasks taken by machines. Our job as leaders, our job as entrepreneurs is to figure out, okay, well then what are the non-repeatable things that people value? What are those? And then what new things can we create that the machines haven't seen? Because that's the limitation of all these models. They can only replicate what they've seen. They cannot create something that's purely net new. Humans can do that right now. Currently, machines can't. The reason why they seem so good is because they're taking the sum total of knowledge on a topic and boiling it down to an above average outcome. But they can't create something that has never been created before. They're still not that creative. The other thing that machines will not do is, all things being equal, people prefer to deal with people, right? The exception is the DMV. Or your cable company's customer service, right? But for the most part, we want to deal with other people. And so people who focus an emphasis on things like relationship building, brand building, the critical importance of brand, those companies will do well, right? Because no matter how many machines there are, you still have to get to the emotional essence of it. These machines, their writing is good, but they don't understand emotion, they don't understand feeling, they don't even understand context, right? You can type in 6 + 7 = and it's going to spit out nonsense instead of the word 13 because it doesn't understand the question. It only is doing a probability of what the next logical word in that sentence is, and it gets confused because that's not a word problem, it's a math problem using words, right? So these machines do have limitations right now. Where they will probably go in the next 10 to 20 years is going to be highly dependent on a new field of technology that's in the research phase now called quantum computing. Today's computers have fundamentally 2 computational modes, right? 0 and 1, binary, right? They've been that way since the 40s. Quantum computing changes that, where it can be 0, 1, and everything in between, all at the same time. And so that gives computers the computational bandwidth to start getting towards sentience, towards becoming self-aware. Because that's what we are. We are, the stuff that makes up your brain is a really, really slow, inefficient, massively parallel processor. It's a chemical computer, but it has trillions of neurons all working together, and consciousness arises from that. Right now, our computers can't do that. Like a CPU or even 8 CPUs in your laptop, that's 8 essentially neurons. They're very fast, they're very good, but that's 8 of them. Right? When you start getting into quantum computing, you start talking about 1,000 qubit, million qubit. Once you get to like trillion qubit, you will have the conditions for which consciousness can arise, and that's a long way off. Next question.
Well, you kind of answered my question, but I was thinking from the content perspective, and working for a company whose sole purpose is to help AEC firms understand what makes them different and give them the tools to be able to differentiate themselves in their writing and their content creation. You've answered some of it, but am I understanding, can you imagine a future where you could also input things like brand voice, brand tone?
Oh, yeah.
And so that when it starts creating content, it actually pulls in and puts personality into the...
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So here's the thing. These models, these particular types of models, there's 2 of them. There's called transformers and diffusers. And we won't get into any of the math of them, but essentially, anything that you can break up into little pieces and feed to it can go into these models. They can learn from the probability and then spit something else back out, right? We are in the very, very, very beginning stages of understanding the power of what these things can do. So yeah, if you have brand voice and you can isolate what characteristics are your brand's voice and what aren't, that gets broken up into little pieces, put in the blender, and then what comes out is stuff that more like that, because you can say, I want to give more weight to that. But to give you an idea of what is possible with these technologies and will be the case in the next 5 years, think about this. Right now we put words in, get words out. Or we can put words in, get a picture out, like we did with the floor plan. Imagine putting the RNA of a virus in and saying, give me a candidate vaccine out. Right? That's where this stuff can go. Here's a rare disease that is not worth a pharma company's time to research right now. Put the genome of that person in, give me 5 candidate drugs out. right? And so your pharma research time goes from 5 years and $5 billion to 10 minutes and one junior chemist to put together the compound and see if it has an effect or not. So these technologies, if we use them well, will be literally civilization changing, because it doesn't matter what goes in as long as it's chunked up into little pieces and then equivalent pieces come on the outside. Brand voice is relatively easy compared to, hey, let's see if we can turn this tumor off. Find the genetic components in someone's genome to turn off a tumor. Just turn it off. Instead of operating or chemotherapy, just turn the thing off. Oh.
Hello.
Hello.
When you think about industries like ours right now,
Yes.
what are the technology companies, software companies that we should keep our eye on that may be able to influence how AI and machine learning and stuff get integrated into our day-to-day? Because right now it seems like there's a collection of all these brilliant ideas everywhere, but it hasn't really become mainstream yet. And so what can we do to keep our eye on something that may impact us in the next 5 years?
This is going to impact you. What typically happens, the life cycle, is you get a big model built out of some kind that is announced to the public. And then, depending on how that model is released, like if it's an open source model like Stable Diffusion, everybody in the cousin runs with it. And what happens is there are then, I would say, they're not the early adopters, they're like the mid adopters who will take a proven technology once it's been proven in general and bring it down to a domain. Those consulting companies probably don't exist yet, right? But they will, as people say, okay, well, in AEC, what are the tasks that are valuable that you would pay good money to have done that we can teach a machine to do? And you'll create a cottage industry initially of those things. Or whatever the dominant consulting firms are in that space. Like if it's Deloitte, for example, in like large construction, Deloitte would say, okay, well, we can build a model for this thing using the existing computational power and then have it be customized on an industry basis. We're already seeing that happen with McKinsey, Bain, Boston, BCG, the big consulting firms, where they say, okay, there's millions of dollars on the table per engagement that's worth our time, right? But as happens with every industry, as the technology filters down, you get all this customization, right? 10 years ago, you did not have AEC firms using Salesforce.com, right? Now it and HubSpot are a matter of course, right? Because there's enough specialization to somebody say, we're a HubSpot partner in AEC. So we know HubSpot really well, and we can customize it for the needs of like how you do proposals and things like that. So that's how this will play out. If you want to get a jump on it, then get into the technology early so that your firm can start developing this stuff and be one of those companies that everybody else then has to go to.
We've talked a lot about how to make our departments or our teams more efficient. How can some of this technology help us serve our clients better? I haven't heard a ton about how this helps us be more client-centric, other than saving us time.
What are your clients' biggest problems?
Budget.
Okay.
Supply chain.
Yep.
Schedule.
I mean, just the reduction in, and this is going to sound awful, but just the reduction in the number of humans involved tends to help because machines are more efficient than humans, right? So to any automation effort will inherently help meet deadlines, because if a machine's doing it on schedule and a human's not, you're automatically going to be slightly better off. But the bigger thing will be looking for the value that a client is specifically looking for. When you go to build a project, for example, when you there's really interesting concrete 3D printers that China is using. China builds entire buildings like a day and a half because they have just a giant printer that uses cinder blocks, and you load a pattern into it and it just slaps it up. That obviously, if you're trying to meet deadlines and budgets, that's a heck of a way to build a building, right? You just have the robot print out a building. Now, I don't know how well it's going to stand up. That part's a bit of a question, but the processes, the outputs that you give to clients, the example of the blueprints, if you can train a machine to generate a first draft of a blueprint that then an architect can look at and approve, or an engineer can say, yeah, this is pretty good, or make these adjustments here, then you don't have that net ramp up time of, okay, we got to start from scratch. You have a template of some kind that a machine can learn from, and then it does first drafts. Just like the first draft of a blog post, you will cut that time, and then you can use your subject matter experts more wisely to say, like, okay, instead of 50 hours on this blueprint, you're going to spend 2, right? So that automatically means you can do 25 times as many blueprints because you're not spending 50 hours per each one. Makes you more efficient, makes your clients happier because they get stuff faster and cheaper. It always comes down to what is the client paying for, right? In a lot of cases, it's our expertise. And if we can get a machine to handle the generation of our expertise faster, then we automatically make our clients happier. And it also improves our margins dramatically. Go ahead, the next microphone. Go ahead.
I assume that we can use this to research our clients and find out what they care about according to the information they've released as far as on the internet, CIPs, council minutes, whatever if you're looking at a public client, and tailor our responses to. So is that a thing that can happen?
Yeah, that's natural language processing. It's taking piles of text and trying to understand what's in the box. So it's unsupervised learning. What are the topics that this client is referring to, right? If you continue to see energy efficiency and lead certification over and over and over again, like, okay, pretty clearly this is going to be a priority for them, even if they don't necessarily tell you that. Looking at the digital paper trail that they've left behind is a way to distill that down. The same thing is true for meetings and things. One of the things that always boggles my mind is we generate so much content every single day. Every time you're on a conference call, you're generating content, but what happens is we just kind of let it drift off into the ether instead of capturing that data, turning it into something that can be analyzed. Then imagine taking your weekly client calls from a client, distilling down all that text and say, okay, what's the pattern in this text? What things have we kept talking about with this client over and over and over again every single month? Can we use that to be more proactive in our client relationship and say, like, look, we understand that cost overruns keep coming up. Here's what we're doing to try to mitigate that so that you can stop asking us about that every third conference call with you. But that data right now gets lost, right? So this goes back to sort of that foundation in the hierarchy of analytics. We've got to get a handle on our data first, including all of the data we're creating. We generate data, right? I'm wearing the microphone for the building here, but I've also got this microphone on, which is plugged into my camera, because what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to take this, stick it into a machine, transcribe it, turn it into closed captions, take that video, put it up on my private YouTube channel and stuff like that, edit it, because I'm creating content right now just by standing in front of you. Right, and talking. I mean, I could just go for a walk outside and do exactly the same thing. It's just I wouldn't be dressed as nicely. But you are creating content. Every email you send is content you're creating. Every blog post you write, every memo is stuff that could be repurposed, and we're not.
Right, and I think one of the biggest things, though, is how much data there is, and I can only consume so much. My time for research clients is just very limited, and I would love that automated.
Mm-hmm.
And my original question, though, is, have you seen people using AI to inform go-no-go decisions and cost of sales? I'd like to predict.
So predicting sales, yes. So like lead scoring is a very popular use where you use all the data, that firmographic data and activity data, to predict what the likelihood that a potential client is going to be a good client or not, right? Whether the deal is going to close or not, based on things like time of sale, who's working on it, all that stuff. That's very common. You'll see that in a lot of enterprise sales software. For stuff like go no go on a decision, not as much, because ultimately that's a human's call, and a lot of times we make decisions that are not necessarily rational. I mean, go, no, go is a very hot topic right now in AI, particularly in automated weapons, right? The big question we are having to face as a civilization is, should a machine be able to pull a trigger? And the answer that we're coming up with increasingly is yes, right? And that's something that, as with all technology, this stuff is amoral. It has no moral value. It is the person operating it that makes those decisions. So even something as simple as, should we work with this client or not? If a machine pulling a trigger makes you uncomfortable, probably a machine just making big business decisions probably should also make you uncomfortable.
Christopher.
Yes.
This goes right into my question. What, as senior marketers and leading our firms, what should we be looking out for in the future as this technology technology keeps growing to protect our brand, to protect our integrity and our ethics?
So the fact that you're asking that question is a really good start, right? The biggest problem we have right now in AI is bias. Right? We have so much of it because it is trained on humans and humans are biased. And there's no getting around that. There's a lot of work being done in healthcare right now that is dramatically flawed, at least in the United States, because there are certain populations like Black Americans, there is no good healthcare data, zero, none, because systemic racism has gotten to a point where even the people who should have better outcomes don't because of 300 years of essentially lesser care. So the fact that you're asking these questions, the biggest question to always ask is what could go wrong? In any technology deployment, what could go wrong? How could this be misused, right? We've seen a pretty dramatic and hilarious example the last couple of weeks with Twitter, right? Hey, blue check marks for everybody. What could go wrong? Oh, wait, Eli Lilly lost $15 billion in marketing capitalization because this was misused, and nobody asked what could go wrong that was in the decision-making role. And here's the other part that's probably a bit more scary. AI is the least of our problems, right? We have 4 other major problems that are going to pose bigger challenges for us as marketers. Am I allowed to go off the rails a little?
Why not?
Okay. We're just starting to understand what the SARS-CoV-2 virus does, but what we do know is we have an additional 2 million disabled people in America, right? The longer this thing goes wandering around, the more it's going to create a permanently disabled group of people, and a lot of them. That's going to have massive spillover effect on things like who applies for jobs, right? Because if a commute is inherently ableist, right? If you are disabled in any fashion, a commute is inherently ableist. So all these companies saying, return to the office, like, well, there's an increasingly large part of your workforce that is not going to be able to do that, and so you have to figure out how do we adapt to that. Second thing is climate change begets supply chain problems, right? Regardless of anything else, the fact that the Danube River right now is so low that we cannot get barges from Serbia to Germany means that all that commerce has to go someplace else. In Illinois right now, there are parts of the Mississippi River you can walk across. You should not be able to walk across the Mississippi, right? So these supply chain things affect all of us. As a result, those things will impact our brands even more than AI, right? Like, hey, we can't help you with this building because we just don't have the steel. Right? It's literally on a shipping container off Long Beach, and it's been trapped there for 50 days because we can't get enough workers because they're all sick. There are a lot of these macro issues that are going to be causing much more short-term problems. Now, that said, when it comes to artificial intelligence, what we want to be looking out for is the what could go wrongs. How can this be misused? How can the data itself that we have to work with be misused? And as marketers, in particular, we have to be on the lookout for how do we make decisions with less data, right? So we have those big data changes coming up in the next month and a half. We already have GDPR in place in Europe, which is dramatically impacting businesses' ability to do stuff there. And with the end of the cookie, the third-party tracking, our ability to do a lot of effective advertising diminishes. So we have to pivot our marketing to work with data that is not as obvious, but we have rights to use, and a lot of that's going to require AI. So for example, do you really need to know that somebody works at a firm that's $500 million and above and has 2,500 employees? Or do you just need to know that when somebody goes to the services page, your project portfolio, your contact page, and about the team page, that pattern of behavior probably means they're going to convert. And by the way, if they looked at these 4 pages in addition, they're probably a qualified lead, right? That behavioral data is privacy safe, but it requires machines to be able to see the pattern and then highlight the pattern. That's the kind of machine learning we're going to need to bring to our marketing. The second thing is what's called marketing mix modeling. This is something that's a personal research project of mine over the next year, is given a whole bunch of data, like all your activities and things, the billboards you bought and all these things, you put it all in a really big spreadsheet and you have your outcome. Can you build a model that says these are the things that likely created lift, that likely worked best? The attribution model is an example of that, where if I'm putting 15% of my budget in Facebook and I'm getting 2% of my leads, I've got a mismatch, right? So marketing mix modeling is an evolved version of that. Privacy safe, right? I don't care who you are, I don't know who you are, but all I know is that I'm putting X dollars into Facebook and I'm not getting X dollars back out. And that type of machine learning, again, it's available now. It just requires time to build these things. So those are some of the tactical things I'd be looking for in the next couple of years, is how do we do privacy safe marketing that still is effective?
So one of the questions that I have going through my mind relates to what we're just beginning to touch upon, and that is that when I'm thinking about our clients and what's really important to myself and our community, very much has to do with the environment.
Yes.
And we more than ever, we're being asked for sustainable design. So as I'm thinking about all of this data storage requires water. And I'm wondering with myself is if we were to start incorporating more of this, what are we sharing with our clients in terms of all of this water usage for data storage? Do you happen to know are there other technologies being looked at that don't require so much water to store all of this data?
I mean, I don't know on the water usage particularly, other than the data centers require enormous amounts of cooling. And I know a lot's been done with like putting them deep underground, for example, to take advantage of geothermal. There's obviously been a lot done with renewables in terms of just to generate the power for these things. In particular, one of the biggest consumers of energy right now, without much of a point, is the whole thing around crypto. Stuff like that just burns like entire forests just to make fake monopoly money. Sorry, I don't have a.
Well, that's how you really know.
Well, guy, how much time you got? That said, the less data you store, the less it costs, right? And so one of the addictions we've had as marketing is storing a whole bunch of data that we don't ever use, right? Data is radioactive, like particularly person identifying data is radioactive. You have to store it, you have to protect it, you have to secure it, and if it gets breached, you're in a heck of a lot of trouble. The less of it you can store, the better. So one of the top things to do is from very early on in the presentation saying, what data do you actually need to make decisions? If you're collecting a whole bunch of data that is never used for decisioning, get rid of it, right? Delete it, just walk away, or put it in some kind of like cold storage. Burn it to a bunch of disks and bury them in a lockbox in the ground, and no one will ever miss them. It's kind of like, you go through your basement, you're like, look, these are some dishes from 41 years ago. I never used these, like just give them to charity. We have to kind of do the same thing with the data we have now, is how much data do we actually need to make decisions? And it turns out not a whole lot. Most of us make decisions emotionally anyway, we just guess. So I would encourage people to take that exercise, the KPI mapping exercise, and say, what data do we need to understand our KPIs? And if your KPI is marketing qualified leads and you've done the analysis and you're still tracking Twitter followers, get rid of that data. If it doesn't matter, get rid of it. But you have to do that analysis to figure out what you can and can't get rid of.
I'm interested in disruptive technology. So you think about Uber as disruptive technology. In your opinion, thinking about this group, our industry, marketing, in your opinion, what do you think is the biggest disruptive technology?
I think diffusion, the diffusion technologies that do image generation from prompts are going to be very disruptive to the creative process and to what you can create. Right now, how long does it take somebody to do a draft of like a rendering of what a building will look like, right? I mean, it's not like 5 minutes, right? It's not, just get out a pencil and just draw something. It takes a while. As you train these models to essentially do the architectural guess and then render it, you can be taking that process from hours to minutes, right? And create better outcomes. I mean, yeah, the thing I put up with the skyscraper on the strip is cheesy as heck, but it's an example of how you can envision something. A substantial portion of AEC is about vision, right? It's about imagining something that doesn't exist. And yeah, it's a building or a facility or a transport line or a series of tubes underground, but it's still something that someone has to be able to see. And if you're using technology that can generate things that people look at, then by definition, you're going to disrupt the existing processes because you can do better versions faster, cheaper of those same processes. So I think that's one area. I will be fascinated to see if anybody in this room at your firms in two years has a machine learning model that is good at generating blueprints, right? That's good at generating schematics, because it's a learnable thing, right? There's a design language to buildings, right? You generally don't put the restroom in the middle of the kitchen, right? You don't put a toilet in the middle of the kitchen. If you do, that's probably very interesting architecture. So those predictable patterns, like, yeah, the toilet's going to be generally here. The water line in a house generally runs vertically in one part. An elevator column runs generally down the center of a building most of the time. That's a pattern that the machine can then replicate. So as long as those patterns continue to exist, then machines can continue to draw on them. So anything that is pattern-based in your business is something that at least partially a machine will be able to help you with. The biggest impact is actually alarmingly going to be for junior people, right? Because someone who's an engineer with 15 years of experience, they're going to be the conductor of the orchestra. They're going to be the ones to look at that saying, no, nope, that's the blueprint's wrong. Send it back. The person fresh out of school, we don't need them, right? And so one of the gaps we're going to figure out over time is, okay, well, how do we grow more 15-year engineers when we no longer have a generation of first-year engineers out of school, because all the tasks we assign to them are now done by a machine, right? So that's one of the gaps that we're going to think about. In terms of disruption to every industry is, what do you do with all the people who are the junior-most people whose tasks have been replaced?
Bear with me as I get this thought out. So, thinking to your very first presentation today, you shared with us the CFOs and that the value that they bring and show aren't really at risk, even though they are at cost. They are complete 100% overhead. Then going into Kat's piece about putting out effective job descriptions and pitches. And again, I think about it from like marketing versus accounting, just because that was kind of where we were. And then you have there in one of your pieces that different roles, different positions within the company. And I think about automated tasks. What are those tasks? What are those positions? Those skills that AI can take in. And I think again, I come back to the accountants, and it's just math. Not that I'm trying to lessen their ability. But when you present at places like this, I hear, a lot of this stuff we're talking about, should we worry about this as marketers? Should we worry about this as marketers? Should we think about this as marketers? Do you get that same sense from accountants?
KPMG.
To me, that's like, you should be scared out of their hands.
KPMG yes. So IBM and KPMG did a collaboration 2 years ago with corporate tax. IBM created a machine learning model to spot anomalies in tax returns, and KPMG started using it. KPMG was able to audit a return for a corporation. Now, these are large returns, right? Spot 3 times the number of anomalies and do it in 6.5 minutes, as opposed to accountants taking 3 months, right? So KPMG is like, cha-ching, we're going to make a whole bunch of money because we can now audit 100 times more corporate taxes. But KPMG's auditors are like, so what exactly are we going to do, right? So some percentage of them are conductors to inspect the output of the machines, and the rest of them are not necessary. So it is anything where it is a repetitive task with patterns involved is fair game for a machine to learn. It's a question of whether it's worth it or not. For example, right now, cleaning a hotel room is pretty common, right? There's defined tasks. Yeah, there's some random things like this. That one guy who glued all the furniture to the ceiling. But for the most part, it's pretty common. But the challenge is it is a repeatable task, but it is not worth automating, because the expense it would take to create robots that could deal with all the weird crevices and like where the sheets are all in a big pile and stuff, it's just not worth it. Humans are generally better at that particular set of tasks. There are machines, though, that are now doing cooking reasonably well, right? There's burger machines out in San Francisco where you just walk up to an iPad and type in the kind of burger you want, and 6 minutes later you've got your burger, and it's exactly what you put in the machine. That's what you get. There's espresso bars that are like that now that are entirely machine-based, and there is a human. The human goes and refills the supplies. He puts more lettuce in the lettuce chute and stuff. But those machines create what the customer wants, in 6 minutes, exactly the way the customer wants it, and there's probably no E. coli because machines don't need to wash their hands after they use the restroom. So there's a lot of, every profession, every field has opportunities for individual tasks to be automated. So if you're feeling a sense of unease, you're not alone. That's just one of the reasons why we keep coming back to things like universal basic income. We need to figure that out because, again, those junior-most roles are going to be the ones where do we need those people? Like there's Flippy, Chippy, and Sippy are the 3 new machines being used by like Five Guys, Sonic, and a couple other restaurants. The fryer in a restaurant is one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment, right? Flippy just does fries, right? And so no human is involved anymore. No one's putting their hand accidentally in the fryer or whatever. It's just cranks out French fries. And so that part of that job is no longer a human's job. Well, if you're back end at a restaurant, that amount of time is now free. So if you're tight on cash, you can maybe get rid of a position in the back of house because the machine's operating the fryer now. So you have no workers' comp, no dangerous working environment, but also fewer people employed. So I think we're at time, right? One more?
Question, did I see someone?
Yeah.
No.
Okay,
Good. Oh, one more.
go for it.
Make it a good one.
No pressure.
Okay, so we are automating all these tasks that are repetitive.
Yes.
We have how many people in the world right now?
8 billion, we just crossed 8 billion.
All right. So, which means what? Maybe a billion of them will be sitting or are out of a job, right? We also, in a world where people like to make mischief. So when someone goes and does something to the AI and the robots or whatever it is, and we don't have people who have the ability to do that work, then what?
So a couple things have to change. In the United States in particular, we were talking about this at the break. In the United States in particular, we have an education system that is about 100 years out of date, right? What we call grades are essentially manufacturing batches. What we call standardized testing is QA for that, to manufacture obedient workers that are, as George Carlin said, just smart enough to operate the machines, but just dumb enough to not realize just how badly they're being used, right? We don't teach critical thinking. In fact, we do not want people to think critically because, again, they tend to ask, why am I being used so badly? We squash curiosity as quickly as we can because, again, that leads to people asking, why am I being so badly treated? If we want to adapt to the world with machines, we have to bring back those traits of critical thinking and creativity because that's how you innovate. That's how you create things that machines have never seen before. Again, these machines can only be trained on things they have seen, right? So if it has never existed before, then the machine does not know how to do it. The only way we create that is by having people who are creative enough, curious enough, critical enough to be able to say, well, this is a dumb way of doing it. Why can't we invent something better, right? So a big societal pivot has got to be fixing education. That doesn't mean paying more money to it. It means fundamentally looking at it and going, the system we're using is out of date with what society needs. The second aspect is there's already a lot of mischief around AI, right? Deep fakes, as an example. For those who are not familiar, deep fakes is when you take somebody's appearance and you map it onto somebody else to assume their identity. It first got its use in porn, and then as with everything in society, it eventually spread to other things like being used in politics to make politicians say things that they did not actually say. There's an arms race in AI of people getting better fakes and then being able to detect those fakes, right? And that is an issue. There are issues with image recognition. So right now, we are looking at the first AI and drone war in history, right? The conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine is doing some amazing things with drones that have never been done before to fight off the Russian invasion. And the way it's being done is just mind-boggling. Like they take your standard consumer drone, rewire it to drop grenades. So they can fly this little thing over, drop grenades on people and fly away. We have not, and we need to, as a civilization, as a species, decide what is and is not okay for machines to do, right? Because otherwise we will, like the CFO says, we want to make things as efficient as possible. So let's And you know, I can understand the perspective. If you are saying, do I want my child to go to war? Or do I want my child to sit in a bunker in Fort Meade with a controller that looks like an Xbox, but a robot's out on the field doing it? I'm pretty sure most parents say, you know what, let's go the Xbox route and just not put our kid in harm's way. The question then becomes, you know, how much does that escalate? So we don't have answers to these things, but these are questions that we need to be asking, and these are questions that we need to be asking the people we elect to office, which, again, not to get too political, kind of scares me because some folks are like, don't understand the internet, and we're trying to legislate things like AI that they really don't understand, and the potential for unintended harm is very, very high. So going back to your question, having clearly defined ethics and values and what is and is not okay, and particularly in the use of information and the outcomes, is going to be critical if we want AI to succeed, if we want to keep our jobs, and we don't want to build a dystopian society that Ridley Scott would be like, wow, I didn't think of that.
And on that note,
And on that cheerful note, thank you very much.